Greetings, friends. You are on the Military Reports channel. And today we will discuss with you the situation in Ukraine on the 9th of April, 2024 year. A lot of things have happened today. Also, let's get started. We will start with you probably the loudest news in the last day, and this news came to us from the district, and, more precisely, from the district and the very settlement of Pervomaiskaya. And according to the published footage, just before the very beginning of the filming of this video, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to establish full control over the settlement of Pervomaisk. During the offensive operation, the armed forces of Ukraine have left the settlement. Perhaps there is still a focal resistance in the village itself, since we have not received information from the Ministry of Defense today. On this day and the next, there will be cleaning measures, and most likely tomorrow the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation will officially announce a complete cleaning of their establishment of control over the settlement called Pervomaiskaya. Of course, this is a brilliant victory. Even this morning, news came that the fighters of the 9th Separate Motorized Brigade of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation of the 1st Corps knocked out the positions of the APU from the settlement. You see some pictures of damaged equipment. There were possible attempts to counterattack, and everyone froze in anticipation. Everyone froze in anticipation of this news. And today, just a few hours after this news, information about full control was received. That's it, the armed forces of Ukraine have retreated. Of course, the retreat was carried out along several routes. It was carried out planned, and probably they tried to do it centrally. Of course, the troops were withdrawn in the locality of Telova. The armed forces of Ukraine were withdrawing the farms located south of not Telova. And of course a separate part retreated along, let's say, the central street in the direction of Nevsky, then to turn west, and again leave the fields in the direction of Karlovka, the Charles Reservoir. In the near future, I repeat once again, there will be a sweep, consolidation, and most likely, based on the trends that we see now on the ground, the armed forces of the Russian Federation do not plan to stop at the achieved boundaries. They will not take Telova, they will try to take it on the move. In order to finally collapse the line of defense Semenovka, Umanskaya, Yasnobrodovka, not Telova. Let me remind you that the Umanskaya bridge has already been broken and the supply is blocked. Yasnobrodovka is supplied so far only by the only road that goes through the Charles Reservoir, which is under control, but not Telova is just around the corner. In other words, in the near future, it is expected that this small artillery pocket, which was controlled at least until today by the armed forces of Ukraine, will be taken under full control. However, most likely, the retreat will begin next night, and from here, and after that, the Russian army will begin to be given operational space. It will be possible to reduce the front line. And then they will trample on the non-tailed Karlev Reservoir, and with a wide front. And the main task of this possible offensive is, of course, an exit to the north to Krasnogorovka. That is, to attack Krasnogorovka from the northwest, and the northeast, I beg your pardon, from the east and of course from the north. If this operation succeeds, it will turn out that the Russian army will cut, including the main supply route, going from the coveted first, coveted second to Krasnogorskrovka, and today there are just a huge number of geolocations. A huge amount of news from the southern and southeastern part of Krasnogorskrovka. Today, what unfolded here is that he has the fiercest battles with, in my opinion, from the very beginning. Specifically militarily focused on this operation, in this direction. The Russian army has made a huge number of attempts to storm. All these assaults most likely and based on geolocation, ended quite successfully. So let's start from the beginning, discuss this operation in detail. Of course, before the start of this offensive, the Russian army, according to tradition, according to the textbook, began to conduct artillery training in the southern part of Krasnogorskrovka. And artillery, multiple launch rocket systems, Suns flew here, everything that could fly flew here, drones flew. All the time trying to clean up, suppress possible, positions the APU who are there with the APs. Either suppress some positions of the Padrons or something else. There are also some more shots from a different angle in the same direction. Here are strikes, explosions, detonation, secondary detonation of some warehouses, possibly ammunition storage places there. And after conducting such massive artillery training, the armed forces of the Russian Federation went on the offensive. And here are these shots of the offensive. I suggest you consider this offensive in detail, because it was a very interesting serious operation. The Russian army has again used tactics that were used during the storming of the Chasiar. At first, one column entered, but at one beautiful point, the column split into two parts, and then the Russian army went on the offensive in two directions. In other words, in these frames, we see the movement of a column of 6 pieces of equipment, having reached the first fortified area. To the railway, the Russian column divided into two parts. 3 units of equipment entered the southeastern part of Krasnogorovka. The second one. The rest, the remaining 3 units of the car, moved further in the direction of the southern part of Krasnogorsk, which is located south of the railway. Apparently, the operator of the Viso reconnaissance drone himself was so shocked that 3 cars drove into Krasnogorovka itself, almost without any resistance. This of course probably caused a shock, and apparently at this moment, the Ukrainian command took up the heads with the question, but how to do? And how did this happen at all, and why 3 BES fly into the southeastern part without hindrance? Passing through the most, let's say, well-echeloned fortified area of the Ifu, which is located exactly in the southeastern part of the settlement. Next, let's pay attention to these frames. There is a lot of interesting information here. Here in the center you can see the trace of the movement of the second group divided, which is moving precisely in the direction of the south, of the southern part of Krasnogorovka. Here is the second group of 3 cars. And here, pay attention to 3 more points a little to the north in the area of the Trudovskaya mine. This is another group, another small group of 3 pieces of equipment, which, among other things, was advancing in some direction. Then the operator returns again to the southeastern part. He is just in shock. He does not understand what is happening. How it was possible to enter and 3 BES, perhaps an armored personnel carrier, drives up at point-blank range to a high-rise building in relation to this area, shoot the building at point-blank range, suppressing the firing positions of the armed forces of Ukraine, and after which the landing takes place. The landing party, after the landing, at least 2 BES, they returned back to the Donetsk region. And nothing seemed to stop there, and it would seem that there could be more. What could be further? However, the armed forces of the Russian Federation, after regrouping, after a possible, the operation was originally planned, launched the second wave of attack, and look at these shots. We see a Russian tank fully equipped with all possible types of armor that probably only exist. He rode first. This tank, the task of this tank was, as it were, to push, and, as it were, to push in the direction, and, in principle, to take the blows of everything possible that could fly, starting with drones, ending with ATACMS and others. This second wave of the offensive was moving in the direction of the southern part of Krasnogorsk-Kavka. After that, we see with you, there was a successful landing, and the armor including, also safely left the combat zone. If we go back to the map for an hour, just for our understanding, let's draw the arrows and understand how the progress went. And you can understand how interesting it was. So the movement started somewhere from the street from Donetsk, bypassed a small quarry. And then the troops of the Russian army moved along the railway, along the forest belt. It was at this point that the first division of the group and part of the troops took place, or rather 3 pieces of equipment, crossed the railway and entered a small trench, a small path, a path between 2 forest belts. And then, in the direction of the southeastern Krasnogorsk-Kavka, they moved along, but in the middle of 2 of these forest belts. Somewhere at this point, there was a second intersection of the forest belt and an exit to a dacha village, in the southeastern part of Krasnogorka, where all the buildings are Russian. Let's say the Russian group reached the extreme northern street, and again the movement took place in a northeasterly direction, reaching a small pocket in such an open area. And already here the Russian group turned again in the southwestern direction, and the equipment and fighters took to storm the Building 15, in my opinion. Building 15 on Vatutina Street. This 15th building was lost by the APU during the assault operations of the first wave, and the Russian fighters captured it and cleaned it up and accordingly tried to gain a foothold. After the group split up in this area, in this direction, there was a division here. The second group of Russian equipment moved towards the southern direction of the settlement of Krasnogorovka, and somewhere at this point, there was a landing. In other words, it turns out that the first group went, crossing the railway, moving along the forest belt, entering the dacha village, moving to the northeast, then turns to the southwest, and begins to storm this building. Including published, let's say the second group we discussed with you was moving in this direction. The landing took place here. The first and second waves landed here. In my opinion, the first one was not successful enough, perhaps that's why they sent the second one. After that, the equipment safely returned exactly the same route. And you and I noticed that there was a third group that moved along the beam of the dry bottom, along this area here. And where the third group was moving is not clear. We lose her from the frame, we lose her from the angle somewhere in this area. Where they moved on is not clear at all. Perhaps the third group was moving along the forest belt, something with the aim of finally cutting off the Paris Commune headquarters from the same Krasnogorskrovka, or perhaps the task was to reach, let's say, the southwestern outskirts of the settlement. It is unclear where they went and what happened to them. And in general, as if the operation was over. Of course she was. Caused a lot of emotions on the internet, in Telegram, on Twitter and other social networks. And of course, everyone was interested, and everyone wondered whether the Russian army had managed to gain a foothold on these lines. Whether it had managed to wedge in, whether it had managed to bring reinforcements, whether it had managed to repel possible Ukrainian counterattacks. And to this day, as if the answers to these questions have not been received, with the exception of one video published already by Ukrainian sources. Here is this Beha, which still came, apparently it just lost its course, firm where the landing took place. And we see you how it is trying to unwind, destroy it with the use of, say, mortars, with the use of drones, artillery. This is the building that the Russian fighters captured. This is the two-story building where we landed. And we see with you that the most important information that we can emphasize with you from this video is that strikes are being carried out on several buildings in this area. In other words, there is a high assumption, the probability that several of these developments, several buildings were captured. Please note that the building was stormed initially along Vatutin Street 15, and in the last frames, we saw blows in beer by the disembodied on the Vatutin building, 11. In other words, there is an extremely high probability that the Russian fighters managed to capture the 11th, 13th, 15th building along the street, and in general, this is also a serious springboard. And based on all these geolocations, we can assume with you that the main task of this amphibious operation was to cut off the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in this support area. This is the support that prevented the Russian army from advancing deep into, let's say, Krasnogorovka for a very long time. Now, due to an attack from the south, an attack from the north and cutting off this fortification from the mainland, it was possible to encircle, and perhaps in the near future there will be a complete sweep of the area. The unification of the two bridgeheads turns out, and then the advance into the central and northwestern parts of Krasnogorsk will begin. In other words, yes, this is what kind of operation we have observed today. And of course, a little, let's say, to the fly in the ointment, in a barrel of honey. Someone came up with the idea after this operation was carried out, to publish footage with this beast machine. With this turns out to be a tank fully equipped with armor. It was published online, and there, in my opinion, some woman. I won't vouch, I won't say who. But in general, the footage is published from all sides. And you know, the intelligence is based on the intelligence that according to simple details, just by the color of the roof. According to the plans, you can use these simple red beams here. Here, professionals and specialists will be able to find you on these two beams, I don't know. Probably in Beijing to find any building, not like in Donetsk, yes. And quickly the Ukrainians as a whole sort of realized, found this building on all these geolocations, on all these frames. And already today this hangar was struck. This destroyed hangar. That's exactly it. It was immediately provoked within a few minutes, maybe half an hour after it was published. And this beast is lying under the rubble. Well, they just destroyed the hangar, maybe they crumbled some equipment there. There is no information about the casualties among the fighters, but in general, here is a small, let's say once again, a fly in the ointment in this barrel of honey. This is the story that happened today in Krasnogorovka. The assault operations continue and, again, Krasnogorovka is being taken in a pincer. The operation went from Pervomaisk. Well, more precisely, it is already coming to the beginning of this operation. And we are seeing the beginning of the operation in the south-southeastern part. And all this time by itself. Iskanders were striking at the central part of Krasnogorka, the FABs arrived, the reserves were suppressed. They were not allowed to transfer, they were not given the opportunity to transfer reinforcements and organize a counteroffensive. A little to the northwest of Krasnogorovka, a blow was struck at. Here we see the supply route here is the movement of a truck with personnel. Reinforcements were already being brought from Kurakov, possibly to organize a counteroffensive. Here, footage is being written about some kind of unloading of personnel, and everything that can arrive immediately arrives at this position. In other words, we can already state with you that some, let's say, control over the main supply routes has already been established. It is too early to talk about the operational environment, but it is obvious that in the next month, the operational environment in this direction will probably be already. In other words, it will be a classic scheme of Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and the same Chasiar. Flanking strikes, and the most important task is to get as close as possible to this first supply route. And here is the second supply route. The closer the Russian army is to these two routes, the faster the battle for Krasnogorovka will end. But based on the fact that the May-Day bridgehead is not an army, based on this situation, I assume that soon enough the Russian army will reach the line of these two streets, these two supply routes, and after that, of course, there will be nothing left of Krasnogorovka, including, perhaps in the forest in the near future, it will be organized to start retreating. In the South Donetsk direction, the picture with geolocations speaks for itself. The assault operations of Novomikhailovka are also continuing here. There are no geolocations on the Novomikhailovka Vita itself, but there are drone strikes on the settlement of Konstantinovka as well. Positions are revealed. Here is an APU mortar, and immediately a bird flies, and there is no APU mortar anymore. In the area south of Konstantinovka, the movement of a passenger car with personnel was detected, a bird strike. And no more passenger car moves. A little to the west, to the south of Kotaranovka, strikes are being carried out using a system of suns. A sufficiently large distance, a blow is struck deep enough. In other words, we can assume that blows are being struck almost from the line of contact, but at the same time. A very risky blow, of course, but on the whole, we see that we are capable of this. And of course, the Ugledar direction. Arrivals of FABs along the Water-Sweet line. In other words, here are attempts to prevent the understanding of the situation as a whole, where the main blow will now be carried in the southern direction. It is necessary in the Donetsk direction, whether it is Ugledar, Vodyanaya Sweet, or Novomikhailovka Konstantinovka. And it is possible that the Russian army will simply start rolling through all these settlements with a skating rink. It is difficult to assume. But in general, here in the near future, we should expect, let's say, an unenviable prospect for the armed forces of Ukraine. Based on the fact that the problems are in Krasnogorskovka, in Pervomaysky. And now, we are returning to the main line of defense of the Afu, Semenovka, Umanskaya, and Berdik. There are no changes here yet. Sluggish fighting is underway. There is no news on Novokaliovo. Strikes are being carried out again on a dacha village located at the intersection of the railway and southeast of Osheretin. That is, there are many warehouses here. Life is a road that's exactly at the intersection of the railway. There are a lot of dugout trenches of the support. We see dense buildings. Apparently, people were allocated little land at one time, and there are quite tight positions in the mustache. Here they are being processed gradually. That is, in the last day, the advance of the Russian army took place exactly to the east and southeast of Novokalinov. Now it is logical to assume that we should expect an activation of directions in this direction, including with the aim of taking the ceramics of this Novokalinov into a semicircle. But so far there are artillery preparations, controls, drone strikes on all sorts of Bradley, on all kinds of strikers, on everything that is trying to drive and move here. In other words, in general, we see that the situation is developing as inconveniently as possible for the APU. Another artillery installation was destroyed with the use of either Krasnopol, ice with the use of Krasnopol. That is, a counter-battery struggle, including in favor of developing in favor of the Russian army. Then everything is extremely sad here. Extremely sad. But despite the very difficult situation, the Ukrainians are holding on, although the retreat as a whole is accelerating. The retreat, let's say, the pace at which we have to retreat, news about the next advance is coming more and more often. But in the end, it can already go exponentially. You know, immediately there is 1, 2, 4, 8, and after 100, or rather after there are 3-digit numbers. The geometric progression makes itself felt, yes. In other words, the situation may be developing in exactly the same way here. Now we are at stage 2, 4, 8, 16 and so on, and then it can already go much faster. Then we move on with you. We return to the Bakhmutsko-Artemovsky direction, where the assault actions of the Eastern Bloc continue. Today, again, sources continue to repeat about the complete establishment of control over Bogdanovka. Since we certainly do not deny this, surely such a situation is possible. We are waiting for geolocation. It is obvious that here this geolocation with control in this part of Pervomaysky turned out to be due to the promotion of the forest, and not due to the promotion from the northeastern and eastern parts, so we are still holding the map in this way. The FABs continue to arrive in the locality itself, the area continues to be cleaned, and in general, it seems that you have already lost understanding of what to do and how to proceed. To fight for the hours of Yar, it will be fought in any way, there is no point in retreating, it will hold on to every square meter. Despite the high losses, and despite the power of weapons and the firepower that arrives daily on the heads of the soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine, and in this direction as well. The other day we discussed with you that the Russian fighters managed, among other things, to advance the southeastern channels. But today footage of the arrivals of the Sun is being published. In other words, it is possible that these frames were outdated a few days ago. And it is possible that it has not yet been possible to advance here, only the process of moving forward is already underway. But in any case, after Tosa at so many short distances, there is an extremely high probability that the promotion will begin in the near future. And, among other things, footage is published before the area is cleaned with the use of drones after the Sun strikes. And, including strikes, the focus is already shifting gradually further to the west. The FABs are flying in a large stream, a large volume, in large numbers already in positions in the USU. On the Ukrainian side, the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal equals exactly this quarter for some reason. There is such an impression due to the blows on this part, and for some reason they are hitting it here. It comes here much less often than it does here. There is an impression that the Russian army is planning to make another breakthrough and go exactly to the position of the Chashyar by this route, and take this part into the bridgehead, and try to gain a foothold. Perhaps even before there are attempts to take both the high-altitude part and the eastern part of the settlement. Well, it's probably just speculation, and in general, some small, let's say, have moved away from the topic. There is no news on the Kleshayevsky direction. Then we are moving with you to the Seversky direction, where we also receive fantastic news. We will start with you with footage of the assault actions of the Russian army along the Bologorov-Kovyenka railway. This is something fantastic in general. Literally 5 minutes ago, we watched an attack there on a tank. It's not clear at all what kind and how it was made. And already in this direction, the Russian army is advancing on motorcycles. 2 motorcycles, Four fighters cross the fields at the highest possible speed, drive up to the strong point, immediately dismount, and begin to clean up the strong point. And during this sweep, those who were there from the side in the USU were forced to roll back, and 4 soldiers of the Russian army established control over additional trenches along the railway. In other words, we will update the map before the next video. This control has been established, either promoted or improved. Here, any word you like better. Well, now we are approaching you. Probably with you the second most important main news on from the point of view of some kind of media effect there. It is zero possible effect. Perhaps this is another frame for most people that does not matter. As let's say another blow of the same lancet on another howitzer somewhere on Kherson direction. But from the point of view of the overall turning point in the future direction, which we are now discussing. This is of course a significant contribution. And we will talk with you about Belogorka. So what significant happened today in Belogorka? And the most important thing is that somehow the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to climb the dump. We managed to climb onto the dump, and the cleaning of the dump began. This is actually a fantastic event. Obviously, there are maps and individual cartographers are already updating maps, showing this promotion. Here are the shots published by the 81st Brigade. This is the 81st. They have been standing here all their lives, and now they are flying drones, looking at Russian fighters moving around the dump, and realizing that the game is over for them. Or they turned over the last page and reached the epilogue of the battle for Belogorovka. Here come the fighters, very Russian, very carefully on the dump, do not take risks, the disembodied fly. Try to interfere with the progress. I am sure these shots were also published by the way last night, that is, there is an extremely high probability that the entire dump is already under the control of the Russian army. At the same time, regular strikes were carried out during the day on the positions of the APU in the southern parts of the dump, on the confluence itself, in the quarry. In other words, the cleanup is underway, and we all understand perfectly well that the main task of the Russian command in the near future is to paint, let's say, the pace, let's call it in cartographers' terms, this area red, and in case of successful coloring of this area in red, the days of Belogorovka will of course, be numbered. It is difficult to imagine how the AFU plans to continue to defend itself at this turn without this dump, when it will be under the control of the Russian army. In general, history will repeat itself here, just like in Avdiivka. After the fall of the landfill, the entire operation in Avdiivka was already doomed to be defensive. It was only agony and an attempt to gain as much time as possible. Perhaps in Belogorovka but in a logical situation. If you ask my opinion, what should the AFU command do here? Then of course the most important thing here, now after the fall of the dump, is to save the lives of personnel, and it is necessary to withdraw the garrison in the south of this direction as soon as possible. In the direction of Serebryanka, and, well, more precisely to the north, Serebryanka and so on. But this is unlikely to be done. There is no news on the South Kapinski direction. Published footage of the destruction of another Leopard somewhere in the direction where, well, more precisely, the place is geolocated on the Ukrainian side of the Zherabets River. As a result of a Lancet strike, another Leopard was destroyed, shot down, and the North Kapinski direction has no news. Zelensky flew to Kharkiv to watch how the defense lines are being built. The Ukrainians are preparing to repel the offensive of a possible Russian army. Along the border, it turns out that the APU drones are trying to track the concentration of forces, personnel. What is happening here? How is happening, and where is happening? They are tracking antennas, tracking cameras, monitoring the movement of military personnel. And in general, everything suggests that the APU is preparing to meet massive missile strikes in the Sumy direction, including massive missile strikes, a large number of explosions. In these frames, we can observe with you another radar P-18 units, and according to the terrain data. After the detection of these radars, a strike was carried out using Iskander, most likely as a result of the strike. Nothing from the radars remained. Fabs are flying, preparations for the operation in Sumy, let's say, Kharkiv from the Russian Federation, are in full swing. According to Yuzhno-Donetsk, there is no more interesting news there. Here the front is static, for some reason, it is not subject to changes. In Zaporozhye, footage of a strike was published, most likely again by Iskander, on a building in an industrial complex, where, according to information, drones were assembled, perhaps even surface ones, as a result of the strike. Drones are not going there anymore. In the area of, let's say, Kryvyi Rog, in the area of Zelenodolsk, let's say there is. This is what the Zelenodolsk-Kryvyi Rog TP turns out, and as a result of the tornado strike, they set up. Tried to assemble some more or less air defense around the Kryvyi Rog TP from several C-300 systems, radar. Launcher, here's the radar, but failed, and as a result of the strike. Most likely a tornado with the air defense data system was destroyed, and we understand that it is possible that after this strikes, shelling and destruction of the Kryvyi Rog thermal power plant will begin.